The sleek conference room of Sterling and Maxwell Investment Partners hummed with anticipation. Around the mahogany table sat the elite of the financial world. Or at least, that's what my brother-in-law James Sterling would call them. I adjusted my simple blue suit, intentionally less flashy than the designer wear surrounding me. "Mr. Zhang," my assistant Amy texted, "final documents are ready. Announcement in 20 minutes. I smiled, touching the worn leather wallet my father had given me before he passed, his reminder that true value isn't always visible on the surface. Today, Michael Zhang, the quiet Asian kid who married James's sister Sarah, would reveal himself as the mysterious owner of the Phoenix Group, the investment firm that had been systematically acquiring Sterling and Maxwell's assets. "What are you doing here?" James's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. He stood at the head of the table, his Italian suit practically radiating disdain. "I received an invitation," I said quietly, holding up the meeting notice. James snatched it, his face reddening. "This must be Sarah's doing. This meeting is for serious investors, Michael. Not whatever it is you do." His partner, Maxwell, smirked from his leather chair. "Come now, James. Surely your brother-in-law manages some investments? A small retirement account, perhaps?" The room filled with carefully modulated laughter. These were people who considered my wife Sarah's teaching career an embarrassment and my modest financial consulting business beneath notice. "Actually," I began, but James cut me off. "This is a meeting about the Phoenix Group acquisition," he sneered. "Something far beyond your capabilities. Please see yourself out." 5 years ago, such casual dismissal would have stung. But that was before I'd built the Phoenix Group into a silent powerhouse, before I'd orchestrated the most elegant acquisition in recent financial history, all while they dismissed me as the quiet Asian son-in-law. "Of course," I smiled, noting how my calm unnerved James. "I'll leave you to your meeting." As I walked out, I heard Maxwell's carrying whisper, "Really, James, how did your sister end up with someone so unremarkable?" If they'd bothered to look beyond their prejudices, they might have noticed that the Phoenix Group had been systematically acquiring their debt, their clients, and their market share for months. That their major accounts were now controlled by my shell companies. That their prestigious investment firm was already mine. I took the elevator to the mezzanine level where Amy waited with our team. "Everything's in place, Mr. Zhang. The board members are all here." I straightened my tie, a simple silk piece that probably cost less than James's pocket square. "The voting shares? 82% secured. More than enough to ratify the takeover." "Perfect." I touched my father's wallet again, remembering his words. "Let them judge the cover. You write the whole book." Through the glass walls, I could see James and Maxwell preparing for their presentation, probably planning to brag about their masterful handling of recent negotiations they'd actually been having with one of my subsidiaries. "Mr. Zhang," Amy checked her watch, "it's time." The conference room's screens lit up with the Phoenix Group's logo. Maxwell stepped forward, tapping his glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a historic moment for Sterling and Maxwell. After months of negotiations, we're finally meeting the owner of the Phoenix Group." James straightened his tie, probably preparing to take credit for orchestrating the deal he thought would save their failing firm. "As you know," Maxwell continued, "the Phoenix Group has been the driving force behind the market's biggest moves this year. Their anonymous owner has demonstrated remarkable insight and strategic brilliance." The crowd murmured appreciatively. The financial world loved its mysteries, and the Phoenix Group's unseen owner had been their favorite topic of speculation. So without further delay, please welcome the founder and CEO of the Phoenix Group, Michael Zhang. I stepped back into the conference room, watching as James's face went from confusion to disbelief to horror. Maxwell, reaching for his chair, missed completely and stumbled backward. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell," I said into the stunned silence. "Shall we discuss the future of Sterling and Maxwell?" James's water glass slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "This is impossible," he stammered. "You're nobody. Just my sister's quiet husband." I smiled, channeling years of patience into this moment. "Actually, brother-in-law, I'm your new owner." The conference room at Sterling and Maxwell crackled with electric tension. The polished financial elite who moments ago had been smirking at my presence now sat frozen, watching their carefully constructed world dissolve. Amy, I nodded to my assistant, who began distributing leather portfolios to the board members. Let's review the terms of the acquisition. You can't be serious, James sputtered, his designer tie suddenly seeming to choke him. This is some kind of joke. A trick. Maxwell, finally recovering his balance, grabbed one of the portfolios. His face went pale as he flipped through the pages. These signatures. These dates. This is impossible. Actually, I pulled up detailed transaction records on the conference room screens. It's been in motion for 3 years. Every major client you've landed since then? They came through Phoenix subsidiaries. Those brilliant market plays you took credit for? My strategies. James lunged forward, his carefully cultivated composure cracking. Sarah put you up to this. My sister always was. Leave my wife out of this. I cut him off, my voice carrying a steel edge that made him step back. Sarah knows nothing about Phoenix. She thinks I run a small consulting firm, which I do, along with managing over $50 billion in assets. The room erupted in whispers. The Phoenix Group's true value had been one of Wall Street's biggest mysteries. Mr. Zhang, Amy announced, the SEC filing is live. The screens filled with breaking news headlines. Mystery solved. Phoenix Group acquires Sterling and Maxwell in historic deal. Wall Street's ghost investor revealed. Asian American entrepreneur behind year's biggest financial coup. You've been playing us, Maxwell realized, his arrogance deflating. All this time. Playing you. I smiled. Oh, I've been watching you. Learning from your mistakes. Building something better while you were too busy mocking my modest career to notice. Amy stepped forward with more documents. Detailed reports of Sterling and Maxwell's declining performance under James and Maxwell's leadership. The lost accounts, the regulatory violations, the systemic discrimination that had cost them top talent. Your father, I addressed James directly, built this firm on integrity and innovation. You turned it into a country club for your ego. Don't you dare mention my father. James's face purpled. You're not worthy to speak his name. Actually, a voice came from the doorway. He is. Everyone turned to see William Sterling Sr., James's father and the firm's founder, walking into the room. He'd retired years ago but still held significant voting shares. Dad. James stammered. What are you doing here? Supporting the best investment decision this firm has made in years, the elder Sterling replied, nodding to me respectfully. I've been watching the Phoenix Group's moves. Brilliant work, Michael. Exactly the kind of strategic thinking this firm needs. The other board members murmured in agreement. They'd watched helplessly as James and Maxwell had steered the company toward mediocrity. The numbers don't lie, I continued as Amy displayed financial projections. Under current leadership, Sterling and Maxwell has lost 35% market share. Your tech infrastructure is outdated. Your best analysts are leaving for competitors. Maxwell stepped forward, attempting damage control. Our clients trust us. Our reputation is built on past glory, I finished. Want to know how many of your loyal clients have already moved their major accounts to Phoenix? Here's a hint, check your top 20 list. The screens displayed account transfers that made several board members gasp. The exodus had been happening right under their noses. This is personal, James accused, his voice shaking. Because I never accepted you. Because you're not. Not what? I asked softly. Not white enough. Not rich enough. Not from the right background. I stepped closer. Or because I saw through your facade years ago? The room went silent. Even in 2025, some truths were uncomfortable in the halls of high finance. When Sarah first introduced us, I continued, you spent 20 minutes explaining basic investment concepts to me, after I'd already managed $1 billion fund. You never once asked about my background, my experience, my ideas. You saw what you wanted to see. Michael ran Goldman's Asian Markets division, William Sterling Sr. added, making James flinch. Before starting Phoenix. Something you'd know if you'd ever bothered to have a real conversation with him. Amy handed me another set of documents, the new organizational chart for Sterling and Maxwell. Your positions have been reassigned. Reassigned? Maxwell choked. You can't just. Actually, I smiled. I can. The board has already approved a complete restructuring. But I'm not completely heartless. I believe in second chances, even for people who never gave them to others. The weeks following what the financial press dubbed the Phoenix Revelation transformed both Sterling and Maxwell and the dynamics of my extended family. The firm's modernist headquarters, once a monument to old money exclusivity, now buzzed with diverse talent and genuine innovation. I sat in what used to be James's corner office, now converted into a state-of-the-art command center. The pretentious oil paintings had been replaced with interactive displays showing real-time global market movements. The only personal touch was my father's worn wallet, displayed in a simple frame, a reminder of where I came from. "Mr. Zhang," Amy entered with her characteristic efficiency, "the quarterly numbers are ready. And James is here again. Third time this week," I noted, reviewing data showing our client assets had grown 40% since the takeover. "Still demanding his executive privileges back." Actually, Amy's professional mask cracked slightly. "He's asking about the junior analyst program." I closed the report remembering my father's last words. "Success without grace is just failure in expensive clothes." He'd said that even after being rejected for a loan by James's bank years ago. "Send him in." James entered, his demeanor notably different from the man who'd thrown me out of the conference room weeks ago. His bespoke suit seemed to hang on him now, as if his arrogance had been holding it up before. "Michael," he started, then stopped, visibly struggling with the new power dynamic. I've completed the analyst training modules. And I realize I knew less than I thought," he admitted, handing me a detailed analysis he'd prepared. "I've identified several inefficiencies in our European operations." I reviewed his work, genuinely surprised by its thoroughness. "This is good work, James." "Shri good. Why didn't you apply this kind of attention before?" He sank into a chair, his carefully maintained facade crumbling. "Because I never had to. The name Sterling opened every door, so I just coasted." He met my eyes for the first time since the takeover. "Like you never could. Like you never did." "Every door that closed taught me something," I replied. "About resilience, about innovation, about human nature. Especially about human nature." My phone buzzed, Maxwell requesting another meeting. He'd been alternating between legal threats and awkward peace offerings since discovering his access to firm resources had been restricted. "Have you talked to your partner lately?" I asked James. "He's struggling," James admitted. "The compliance position you offered is more than his record deserves," I finished. "The SEC audit found enough violations to justify a lifetime ban." "Then why didn't you report him?" I walked to the window, looking out at the city where my father had arrived as an immigrant with nothing but dreams and determination. Because everyone deserves one chance at redemption. Not because they deserve it, but because offering it makes us better. Amy appeared with more reports, the latest innovations from our newly established quantitative trading division, freed from old-school restrictions. "The tech integration presentation is ready." And Mrs. Sterling left another message about the family foundation. Ah yes, the foundation, James's mother's pride and joy, now under new management. Send her the new governance guidelines. The foundation continues, but with actual metrics for impact. James studied me thoughtfully. "You're not destroying our legacy like everyone feared. You're reinventing it." "I learned more from watching your failures than you did from experiencing them," I replied. "Every time you dismissed me, I worked harder. Every time you flaunted your inherited position, I built something earned." My phone buzzed again, the board requesting an emergency session. But this time it was good news. Our new algorithmic trading platform had exceeded all projections, pushing Sterling and Maxwell to the forefront of financial technology. "Did you know," I told James, "that your father kept detailed journals of his early days? His vision wasn't about social status or family prestige. It was about financial innovation, about creating real value." "I never read them," he admitted. "I was too busy playing the role of the entitled heir." "Well," I slid a folder across the desk, "here's your chance to write a new chapter. The analyst position is yours if you want it. Same salary as every other junior analyst, same opportunities for advancement based on merit." He picked up the contract, his hands steady now. "And if I succeed? Then you'll advance. Just like anyone else." I gestured to the screens showing our global operations. "Look at what we've accomplished in weeks. Real innovation, real growth, real respect. Amy brought in the latest employee satisfaction surveys, up 70% since the restructuring. Turns out people prefer working for a company that values performance over pedigree. Mr. Zhang, she announced, your wife Sarah is here. I smiled, remembering how I'd kept my true role hidden even from her, wanting her to love me for who I was, not what I owned. Show her in. James, stay if you'd like. It's time she knew everything. Sarah entered, her eyes widening at seeing her brother in my office. Michael, James, what's going on? Your husband, James said quietly, is the most brilliant financial mind I've ever met. And I was too blind to see it until now. I pulled up the Phoenix Group's complete portfolio on the screens. Sarah, remember how you always said I was too humble about my work? There's something I need to show you. Her eyes grew wider as she processed the information, the billions in assets, the global reach, the strategic brilliance that had built an empire while she thought I was running a small consulting firm. All this time, she whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to be just Michael to someone, I replied softly. Not the investor, not the CEO, just the man you fell in love with. James stood up, looking between us. I'll start on that European analysis, he said, heading for the door. At the threshold he paused. Michael, I was wrong about you. About everything. After he left, Sarah walked around the office taking it all in. So all those dinners when James was bragging about his latest deals. I own most of the companies he was talking about, I finished. But I preferred listening to you talk about your students. She touched my father's framed wallet. Your dad would be so proud. He was proud already, I said. Because I married for love, not advantage. Because I built something real, not just an image. My phone buzzed one final time, Global Markets responding to our latest innovations. Sterling and Maxwell was no longer just another old money investment firm. It was becoming something more, something better. Amy, I called out, schedule the board meeting for tomorrow. And Sarah, would you like to see what your modest husband really does? The sun set over the financial district, casting long shadows through the glass walls. Somewhere out there, my father's spirit was smiling, knowing that his son had not just succeeded in their world, he'd transformed it.
The health inspector arrived exactly 30 minutes before our grand opening, clipboard in hand, and a suspiciously familiar, determined look in his eyes. I recognized that expression. It was the same one my father wore when he thought he was doing something for my own good. I'm Olivia Martinez, though in the culinary world, I'm better known as Chef Liv. At 36, I've spent the last 15 years building my career in the restaurant industry, despite my parents' constant attempts to derail what they call my hobby and push me back toward medical school. This is an unscheduled inspection, the man announced, flashing his badge. We received an anonymous tip about potential violations. Anonymous, right? Just like the anonymous complaint that had delayed our liquor license and the anonymous calls to our suppliers questioning our credit. My parents' fingerprints were all over these roadblocks, though they were too careful to leave any actual evidence. Of course, I smiled professionally, ignoring the chaos this would cause to our opening night preparations. James, please show the inspector our documentation while I call our restaurant group's legal team. That last part made the inspector pause. He'd probably been told this was just a small independent restaurant, an easy target for harassment. The mention of a corporate legal team clearly hadn't been part of his briefing. What my parents didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I wasn't just opening a single restaurant. Harvest Table was the newest addition to the Verdi Restaurant Group, one of the most successful hospitality companies in California, a company I'd secretly founded 10 years ago. My parents, Dr. Robert and Dr. Catherine Martinez, probably thought they were being clever. They'd spent years trying to redirect my culinary ambitions, first with guilt. We spent a fortune on your pre-med education. Then with manipulation. No man will want to marry a chef. And finally with outright sabotage. When I opened my first restaurant, officially owned by a holding company to hide my involvement, they'd somehow engineered a gas leak inspection that shut us down for a week. The second restaurant faced mysterious electrical issues. By the third, I learned to operate completely under the radar, using layers of corporations and trusts to mask my ownership. Now I own 15 successful restaurants across California, each one carefully distanced from my name. I worked openly as a chef, letting everyone assume I was just another culinary professional. Meanwhile, the mysterious owner of Verdi Restaurant Group was known only as Elan Holdings, my initials hidden in plain sight. Chef, my sous chef Marco's voice pulled me from my thoughts. The inspector wants to check the walk-in. Fine, I said, watching the man head toward our immaculate refrigeration unit. But call Linda in legal anyway, and push our opening back 30 minutes. My phone buzzed. Speaking of parents, there they were. Their timing was never coincidental. Olivia, darling, my mother's voice dripped concern. We just heard there might be some problems with your little restaurant's opening. Maybe this is a sign that it's time to reconsider your choices. You know, Dr. Peterson at County is still willing to hold a residency spot for you. Everything's fine, Mom. I cut her off, watching the inspector scrutinize our temperature logs. The inspection is just a formality. Inspection? Her surprise would have been convincing if I hadn't known better. Oh dear, that sounds serious. Your father and I were planning to come to your opening. But perhaps we should wait. Actually, I said, a plan forming in my mind. You should definitely come. In fact, I'm reserving you the best table in the house. It's time you saw what I've built. There was a slight pause. What you've built? Just be here at 7, I told her. Both of you. Dress formally. This isn't a casual dining establishment. After hanging up, I gathered my staff for an emergency meeting. These people weren't just employees. They were loyal team members who'd worked with me across multiple restaurants, though none of them knew I was their actual boss. Listen up, I announced. Tonight's going to be interesting. My parents are coming, and they're probably expecting to see me fail. I need everything to be absolutely perfect. The team's response was immediate and determined. They'd all heard stories about my parents over the years, seeing their attempts to interfere with my career. This wasn't just professional anymore, it was personal. The health inspector left 2 hours later, frustrated at finding nothing to cite. Our documentation was perfect, our facilities immaculate. I'd learned long ago to run everything by the book, knowing my parents would look for any weakness to exploit. As evening approached, I stood in the dining room, surveying the space we created. Harvest Table was my most ambitious project yet, a farm-to-table concept that combined California's fresh ingredients with the classical techniques I'd learned in France. The decor was elegant but welcoming, with warm woods and subtle lighting that made everyone look their best. The kitchen was my pride and joy, completely open to the dining room, allowing guests to watch their food being prepared. I designed it specifically to showcase the professionalism and skill of our culinary team. Tonight, it would show my parents exactly what their hobby chef daughter could do. At 6:30, Marco approached with news that made me smile. Chef, reservations just called. Your parents tried to change their booking to a different night. Said something came up. Let me guess. They claimed to have a medical emergency. Hospital board meeting, actually. I nodded, having expected something like this. Call them back. Tell them their reservation has been moved to the owner's private table and cannot be changed. And Marco, make sure they understand that Elan Holdings specifically requested their presence. You're going to tell them? Marco asked, knowing only that I had some connection to the restaurant group's mysterious owner. I'm going to show them, I corrected. Sometimes people need to see the truth in high definition. As the first guests began arriving, I felt the familiar energy of a restaurant coming to life. The buzz of conversations, the clink of glasses, the rhythmic sounds of knives on cutting boards. This was my real passion, the world I'd chosen despite every obstacle my parents had thrown in my path. At exactly 7 o'clock, they arrived. My father in his custom suit, my mother in designer evening wear, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The maitre d' led them to the owner's table, the best spot in the house, with a perfect view of both the kitchen and the dining room. I watched them take in the elegant space, saw the surprise on their faces as they realized this wasn't the small-time operation they'd expected. Their expressions shifted from dismissive to confused as they noticed the Verdi Restaurant Group logo subtly incorporated into the decor. Good evening, I said, approaching their table in my chef's whites. Welcome to Harvest Table. Tonight's menu has been specially prepared for you. My mother started to speak, probably to make an excuse about leaving early, but I held up my hand. Before you say anything, there's someone who'd like to meet you. The owner of Verdi Restaurant Group has been looking forward to this evening for a very long time. Their faces showed a mix of emotions. anxiety about meeting the owner they'd inadvertently been harassing, calculation as they considered how to turn this to their advantage, and underlying it all, the familiar disappointment that their daughter was just a chef. Little did they know, their whole world was about to turn upside down. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is served at exactly the right temperature, with impeccable presentation and perfect timing. I left my parents at their table, letting them stew in anticipation while I returned to the kitchen. Through the open design, they could see me directing my team with practiced ease, expediting orders, and adding finishing touches to elaborate dishes. "They're getting nervous," Marco reported, glancing at my parents' table. "Your mother's checked her phone 6 times in the last 2 minutes." Of course she had. They were probably trying to figure out how to minimize the damage, assuming the owner would confront them about their interference. What they couldn't know was that every anonymous complaint, every attempted sabotage, had been carefully documented over the years. At precisely 7:30, I nodded to Marcus, our restaurant group's CFO, who'd flown in specially for tonight. He approached my parents' table carrying a leather portfolio embossed with the Verde Restaurant Group logo. "Dr. and Dr. Martinez," he greeted them formally. "I'm Marcus Chen, Chief Financial Officer of Verde Restaurant Group. Before you meet our owner, there are some documents you should review." The portfolio contained a complete history of their interference, dates, times, names of officials they'd contacted, even recordings of phone calls they'd made to our suppliers. Watching through the kitchen window, I saw their faces pale as they realized how thoroughly their actions had been tracked. "This is absurd," my father sputtered, pushing the portfolio away. "We were only trying to protect our daughter from making a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Let's review what that mistake has produced." He pulled out another set of documents, financial reports showing the success of Verde Restaurant Group. 15 restaurants across California, over 300 employees. Annual revenue in the millions, awards, reviews, and accolades from the culinary world's most respected critics. All of this, Marcus continued, built by someone you dismiss as making a mistake, someone who chose to follow their passion instead of your prescribed path. My mother's hand shook as she reached for her water glass. Who owns all this? That was my cue. I removed my chef's coat, revealing a tailored blazer underneath, and walked to their table. Without a word, I sat down and pulled out my business cards, the ones I rarely used, displaying my full title. Olivia Martinez, CEO and owner, Verde Restaurant Group. The silence that followed was absolute. "That's impossible," my father finally managed. "You're a chef, just a chef." "No," I corrected him. "I'm a chef because I love cooking. I'm a business owner because I'm good at it. And I'm successful because you taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the people who should support you the most will become your biggest obstacles." All this time, my mother whispered, looking around at the restaurant, my restaurant, with new eyes. "Every time we tried to stop you, you were actually trying to sabotage your own daughter's multi-million-dollar company," I finished for her. "Ironic, isn't it? You wanted me to be successful, but couldn't recognize success unless it fit your narrow definition." The kitchen behind us hummed with activity, my team executing the choreographed dance of a high-end service with perfect precision. Through the windows, we could see the dining room full of happy customers enjoying meals I had designed. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Would you have believed me?" I countered. "Or would you have found some way to dismiss this too? Call it luck, or a phase, or another hobby?" Their silence was answer enough. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice firm but not unkind. "First, you're going to enjoy a 9-course tasting menu that showcases exactly what your hobby chef daughter can do. Then, we're going to have a serious discussion about boundaries and respect." Over the next 3 hours, I watched my parents experience my culinary vision through each carefully crafted course. Their expressions shifted from shock to reluctant appreciation to genuine amazement as dish after dish arrived, each one demonstrating both artistic creativity and technical mastery. By the dessert course, a deconstructed tiramisu that had earned one of our restaurants a Michelin star, something had changed in their demeanor. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning understanding of what they failed to see all these years. "This is..." My mother paused, searching for words. "This is extraordinary, Olivia. All of it. This is what I've been trying to show you," I replied. "That success doesn't have to look like your version of it. That passion can build something powerful if you give it room to grow. My father stared into his coffee cup, uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he looked up. We were wrong. Not just about the restaurants, but about everything. We were so focused on what we thought was best for you that we couldn't see what you were actually building. The question is, I said, what happens now? The answer came in small steps over the following months. My parents, perhaps for the first time, had to earn their way back into my life. They started with written apologies to every person they contacted in their attempts to sabotage my restaurants. Then came the difficult task of rebuilding trust. To their credit, they tried. My father started actually tasting the food instead of just pushing it around his plate. My mother asked questions about the business, genuinely interested in understanding what I'd built. They attended restaurant openings as proud parents rather than saboteurs. Last week, I found my father in deep conversation with Marco about the chemistry behind different cooking techniques. It's fascinating, he told me later. The precision, the science behind it, it's not so different from medicine, really. That's what I've been saying for 15 years, I reminded him. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Sometimes the hardest things to see are right in front of us. The health inspector who tried to disrupt our opening night, he was reassigned after an investigation revealed he'd acted on false complaints. My parents wrote a formal apology to the health department, taking full responsibility for their actions. Yesterday, I received a surprising request from my mother. She wanted to host a family dinner, not at their house or a fancy restaurant, but in one of my restaurant's teaching kitchens. I thought, she said hesitantly, you could teach me some basics. If you're willing. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. An acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, her daughter had something valuable to teach her. The Verde Restaurant Group continues to grow. We're opening our 16th location next month. A cooking school and restaurant incubator designed to help other passionate chefs build their dreams. My parents will be at the opening, this time to support rather than sabotage. The honors table at Harvest Table, where everything changed that night, has become a family tradition. We meet there monthly, not to rehash old hurts, but to build something new. My father still occasionally mentions medical school, but now it's a joke between us rather than a weapon. You know, he said during our last dinner, watching me plate a complicated dish with surgical precision, maybe you did become a kind of doctor after all. You just heal people with food instead of medicine. Coming from him, it was more than a compliment. It was an acceptance of who I am and what I've chosen to be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's giving them the chance to finally get it right. The lake house had always been my safe haven. Nestled in the pines along Lake Tahoe's north shore, it was where Thomas and I spent our honeymoon, where we escaped for quiet weekends, and where he taught me to sail in the crystal clear waters. Now, 6 months after his death, it was the only place I could still feel close to him. I'm Julia Anderson, formerly Julia Chen, and at 36 I never expected to be fighting my mother-in-law for my husband's inheritance. But Margaret Anderson had other plans for the family property, plans that didn't include her Chinese-American daughter-in-law. Thomas and I met in law school at Stanford. He came from old money. The Andersons had been California land developers for 3 generations. I was a scholarship student whose parents owned a small grocery store in San Francisco's Chinatown. On paper, we were an unlikely match. In reality, we were perfect. You challenge me, he'd say, grinning after one of our heated debates about property law. Everyone else just agrees with me because I'm an Anderson. His family's reaction to our relationship was mixed. His father, George, welcomed me warmly, impressed by my academic achievements and career ambitions. His younger sister, Emma, became my closest friend, often joining us for weekend trips to the lake house. But Margaret never quite got over her son choosing someone who didn't fit her society page aspirations. At least she's a lawyer, I overheard her telling her friends at our engagement party. Even if she's not quite what we expected for Thomas. The lake house had been Thomas's sanctuary since childhood. When his grandfather left it to him in a private trust on his 21st birthday, it became our special place. We'd spent the last weekend of his life there, planning our future. I want our kids to grow up knowing this place, he'd said, watching the sunset from our deck, learning to swim in the lake, having adventures in the woods, just like I did. 3 days later, he was gone. A pulmonary embolism, sudden, unexpected, devastating. One moment we were planning our family, The next, I was planning his funeral. The first few weeks passed in a blur of grief and paperwork. Margaret took charge immediately, sweeping in with her perfect blonde hair and pearls to orchestrate everything. I was too numb to argue about the flowers, the service arrangements, the endless parade of society figures I barely knew. But then came the meeting at Thomas's estate. "It's just a formality, dear," Margaret said, her voice honey-sweet as she led me into her husband's study. "Family tradition, really. All Anderson properties are held in the main family trust. We just need you to sign these papers transferring Thomas's holdings back to the trust." I stared at the stack of documents she placed before me. "But the lake house. Thomas's grandfather left it to him directly. It's not part of the family trust." Margaret's smile tightened. "All Anderson properties belong in the trust, Julia. It's how we've preserved the family wealth for generations. Surely you understand the importance of tradition." I did understand. I understood that she was trying to take advantage of my grief, to seize control of the one piece of property that had been solely Thomas's. But I was exhausted, drowning in sorrow, and somehow I found myself nodding as she pointed to line after line requiring my signature. Looking back, I should have read those documents more carefully. I should have called my own lawyer instead of trusting the family attorney who kept assuring me it was all standard procedure. But grief does strange things to your judgment. It wasn't until 2 months later, when I tried to visit the lake house for Thomas's birthday, that I realized what I'd done. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson," the property manager said awkwardly, "but I have strict instructions from Mrs. Anderson, or the elder Mrs. Anderson, that the property is off limits. She's having it renovated for the summer season." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. That evening, I pulled out my copies of the documents I'd signed. Reading them properly for the first time, my lawyer's training finally kicked in. Margaret hadn't just had me sign over the lake house. She'd had me relinquish all claims to Thomas's separate property, including his personal investments and the tech startup he'd been quietly building. Oh God, what had I done? I whispered to our empty apartment. The next day, I started digging. As a corporate lawyer myself, I knew where to look. The Anderson family trust documents, property records, Thomas's grandfather's will. I requested everything. Most importantly, I started going through Thomas's home office, looking for any records he might have kept. I found them in an encrypted folder on his laptop, hidden behind layers of security that took me days to crack. The password made me smile through tears. "Julia loves Lake Tahoe," followed by the date we first sailed together. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Thomas had been investigating the family trust for months before his death. There were discrepancies in the property holdings, suspicious transfers, and evidence that Margaret had been manipulating the trust's assets for years. But the real shock came in an email draft dated 3 days before he died. "Mom, I know what you've done with the trust funds. The missing properties, the hidden accounts, the diverted rental income, all of it. I'm meeting with the trustees next week to present evidence unless you agree to step down as trustee immediately. I also know about grandfather's real will, the one you hid when he died. The lake house wasn't the only property he left outside the family trust. This ends now. Thomas." The email was never sent. Instead, my healthy, athletic husband had died suddenly of a pulmonary embolism, a condition that can be caused by certain medications. My hands shook as I opened the next file. It was a scanned copy of Thomas's grandfather's true will, drastically different from the one that had been probated. The lake house wasn't the only property he tried to protect from the family trust. There were other holdings, significant ones deliberately placed in separate trusts for his grandchildren. A note attached to the will caught my eye. It was in Thomas's grandfather's handwriting. "To my grandchildren, I've watched Margaret's growing influence over the family with concern. The trust was meant to preserve our legacy, not become a tool for control. These properties are your independent inheritance, free from the trust's restrictions. Use them wisely." I sat in Thomas's office until dawn, reading through everything. The truth was clear. Margaret had been manipulating the family's assets for years, using the trust as her personal piggy bank while maintaining an iron grip on the family through financial control. And now she had tricked me into signing away not just the lake house, but all of Thomas's independent inheritance, an inheritance he had died trying to protect. My grief turned to anger, then to determination. I was a lawyer, trained to fight precisely these kinds of battles. More importantly, I was Thomas's widow, and I owed it to his memory to expose the truth. I made 3 calls that morning, one to Emma, who I knew would want to know what her mother had done, one to a forensic accountant who specialized in trust fraud, and one to George Anderson's oldest friend, a judge who had never quite trusted his daughter-in-law. Judge Williams? This is Julia Anderson. I need your help with something. How much do you know about the Anderson Family Trust? What I didn't know then was that Margaret had plans of her own for the lake house. Plans involving a surprise wedding that would shock the entire family. But she was about to learn that underestimating Thomas's widow was a serious mistake. The truth about Margaret Anderson's deception unraveled on a sunny morning in June, exactly 3 months after I discovered Thomas's hidden files. I was in my office at Chen and Partners, the law firm I'd started after leaving my corporate position, when Emma burst in, her face flushed with anger. "You won't believe what Mom's planning," she said, dropping into the chair across from my desk. "She's getting married. At the lake house. Next month." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Married? To whom?" "Robert Sterling." Emma's voice dripped with disgust. "You know, Dad's old business partner. The one who mysteriously got all those lucrative development deals after Dad died." Robert Sterling. The name appeared multiple times in Thomas's investigation files. He and Margaret had been spotted together at private dinners, always careful to maintain the appearance of a business relationship. But Thomas had suspected something more sinister. "She's already renovating the house," Emma continued. "New furniture, new landscaping, using trust money, of course. She's telling everyone it's going to be the society event of the year." My heart raced as pieces started falling into place. Margaret's insistence on me signing over the lake house, the rushed renovations, the secret meetings with Sterling, it was all part of a larger plan. Linda Martinez, the forensic accountant I'd hired, had already uncovered a pattern of property transfers between Margaret and Sterling going back years. Properties would mysteriously move from the Anderson Trust to Sterling's development company, then be resold at massive profits, with kickbacks flowing through offshore accounts. But the lake house was different. According to Thomas's files, it sat on land that was crucial for Sterling's newest development project, a luxury resort that would require access to the lake, a project that couldn't proceed as long as the property remained under independent ownership. "There's more," Emma said, lowering her voice. "I overheard Mom talking to Robert about Thomas, about his death." My hands gripped the desk. "What did they say?" "Something about how fortunate it was that Thomas never got to meet with the trustees, how everything worked out as planned." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Julia, you don't think—" "I think it's time we talked to the police," I said quietly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation, from the Financial Crimes Unit took our evidence seriously, especially after Linda presented her analysis of the trust's manipulation. Judge Williams provided crucial support, sharing his own concerns about Margaret's handling of the trust after George's death. But our biggest break came from an unexpected source: Margaret's personal assistant, Jennifer. "I can't do this anymore," Jennifer said, meeting me in a quiet cafe far from the Anderson offices. "Not after what I found." She handed me a USB drive. "Mrs. Anderson keeps a private diary on her computer. Last week, while she was meeting with the wedding planner, I made a copy." Her hands shook as she sipped her coffee. "It's all in there. Everything about Mr. Sterling, about the trusts, about Thomas." The diary entries were damning. Margaret had been working with Sterling for years, using her position as trustee to facilitate his development schemes. When Thomas started investigating, they'd realized he was a threat. Sterling had supplied the medication, a blood thinner that, in the right dose, could cause a pulmonary embolism. Margaret had insisted on making Thomas's morning smoothies during his last visit home. The final entry made me physically ill. With Thomas gone and that silly girl signing away her rights, the lake house is finally ours. Robert's resort project can proceed as planned. All it cost was one troublesome son who never understood the importance of family business. I took everything to Detective Chen. Within days, the investigation expanded to include homicide. But we had to move carefully. Margaret was planning her wedding for the following weekend, and I had my own plans for her special day. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Margaret had spared no expense, transforming the lake house grounds into a fairy tale setting. White chairs lined the lawn leading down to the lake, where an elaborate arch stood ready for the ceremony. I waited until all the guests were seated, until Margaret, radiant in an expensive white gown, began her walk down the aisle. Then I stepped out from behind the arch, followed by Detective Chen, Emma, and a team of police officers. "Margaret Anderson," Detective Chen's voice carried across the stunned crowd. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Anderson and fraud against the Anderson Family Trust." Margaret's perfectly composed face crumpled. "You can't do this. This is my property." "Actually," I interrupted, holding up a document, "it's not. This is your father-in-law's true will, the one you hid. And this," I held up another paper, "is proof that the documents you had me sign were obtained under false pretenses and are therefore void. The lake house belongs to me as Thomas intended." "You have no proof of anything," Sterling shouted, starting forward, but police officers were already moving to block his path. "We have your diary, Margaret," I said quietly. "We know about the blood thinners, about how you and Robert planned Thomas's death when he threatened to expose your schemes, about all of it." What followed was chaos. Margaret and Sterling were led away in handcuffs, their perfect society wedding transforming into a perk walk. Guests fled in horror, leaving behind upturned chairs and scattered flowers. Through it all, I stood on the deck where Thomas and I had spent so many happy evenings, feeling his presence beside me. The aftermath brought more revelations. The investigation uncovered decades of fraud, with millions siphoned from the family trusts. Other Anderson properties were restored to their rightful owners, and the trust was placed under new management with Emma and me as co-trustees. Sterling's resort project died before it began. Instead, Emma and I established the Thomas Anderson Memorial Foundation, dedicating the lake house grounds as a public nature preserve. We kept the house itself private, a place for family, real family, to gather and heal. 1 year later, I stood on that same deck, watching Emma's kids play in the water while her new husband grilled dinner. The Anderson family had changed, grown smaller but stronger. Those who remained were bound by love and trust, not greed and manipulation. Last week, I found an old photo album in Thomas's study. In it was a picture from our first summer here. Thomas teaching me to sail, both of us laughing as I nearly capsized the boat. Next to it, he'd written, "The best kind of family is the one you choose." I'm keeping his office exactly as it was. But the rest of the house has slowly transformed. Emma's children have their own rooms now, filled with toys and laughter. The formal dining room has become a casual space where we gather for long, relaxed meals. The garden where Margaret once planned her society events now grows vegetables and wildflowers. Yesterday, I scattered some of Thomas's ashes in the lake at sunrise. As I watched the early morning light dance on the water, I remembered his words about wanting our children to grow up here. Though our own children never came to be, the house is filled with family all the same. Emma's kids who call me Aunt Julia, Judge Williams who visits every Sunday, even Jennifer who found the courage to do the right thing and has become a dear friend. Margaret and Sterling are serving long sentences for Thomas's murder and financial fraud. The society pages that once celebrated their relationship now document their downfall. But their story is not the one that matters. What matters is the legacy Thomas tried to protect, not just the property, but the values his grandfather wanted to preserve: family, integrity, love. The lake house stands as a testament to that legacy, not as a symbol of wealth or status, but as a home where chosen family gathers, where healing happens, where love wins over greed. In the end, Margaret's perfect society wedding became something far more meaningful. The day justice was served, truth prevailed, and real family triumphed over false tradition. Thomas would have liked that ending.